Sometimes the unlikeliest of people can be targeted for the most diabolical of motivations. A time of innocent fun can quickly be turned into something straight out of a nightmare. Such seemed to be the case of a young college student who went out one Halloween night to engage in a time of costumes, partying, and pranks, only to wind up dead, face down in a frozen river without the slightest idea of how or why he got there. This is the unexplained death of young Christopher Jenkins.
In today's institutes of so-called higher learning, good times and drinking with friends are just as much a part of the curriculum as books, exams, and term papers. The University of Minnesota is no different, and it is here where we begin our story. 21-year-old Christopher Jenkins attends as a senior at UOM. He is described by family and friends as a bright go-getter. He was never quick to join the ranks of the in crowd and always championed the truth of self over anything else. Young Christopher was a model student with a high GPA and even served as the captain of his university's lacrosse team. Majoring in business, Christopher was set to graduate with honors and reportedly had several job offers and interviews on the table, the setup for a very bright future indeed. But something happened that would stop Christopher, quite literally dead in his tracks. That something was Halloween night of the year 2002. Dressed in a whimsical Indian costume, Christopher had spent most of the night partying and bar hopping with several friends. A couple of hours before midnight, the group ends up in a bar near downtown Minneapolis. Events would unfold that would separate Christopher from the rest of his group and would ultimately set the young man wandering by himself in the dead of night on the cold city streets. While drinking at the bar, the college student spills a drink on himself and prompts a bouncer to throw him out for allegedly being too drunk. Without any of his personal belongings and heavily intoxicated, Christopher begins to meander out of sight down the dark and desolate road, never to be seen alive again. Christopher would go missing for the next 4 months. That is, until the morning of February 27th, 2003, when his lifeless body is discovered. Half frozen in the waters of the Mississippi River, just off the 3rd Avenue Bridge, is the decomposing corpse of Christopher Jenkins. Police immediately come to the conclusion that his death was either accidental or a suicide. They theorize that due to his level of intoxication, he wandered the streets of Minneapolis until he staggered across the Hennepin Bridge. At this point, he either fell off or voluntarily leapt off the overpass to his death in the icy waters of the Mississippi. The family was predictably skeptical and cited numerous discrepancies with the investigation. With the aid of a private investigator, it was learned that several witnesses saw a group of men attacking an individual in costume the night of Christopher's disappearance. Sadly, these accounts were never confirmed nor followed up on. Bloodhounds traced the young man's scent to a parking garage, then over to a nearby interstate, leading the family to believe that their son was abducted and driven to an isolated location the night he vanished. They believe he was then killed and brought back to the location he was later found at. Furthermore, the family point out that he was still in his costume, with nearly all of his accessories and jewelry intact. These items would have surely been dislodged or lost had Christopher remained in the river the entire time he was deceased. In addition, the body suffered no injuries consistent with a fall from a bridge, such as broken bones or excessive bruising one would expect to find if someone had thrown themselves from a great height. The twists and turns in this bizarre case were only beginning, however, as unceasing appeals from the family resulted in the case being reopened in the fall of 2006 to be investigated as a potential homicide. In that same year, an incarcerated murderer confessed that Christopher had been thrown from the Hennepin Bridge by an acquaintance of his. The man's claim came into sharp question concerning the veracity of its source. The following year, The inmate's story was dismissed because of a lack of any evidence. Investigators at the University of Minnesota seem to side with the family in their conclusions that Christopher's death was not an accident. They speculate that his body was placed a mile upstream from where he was found, as his positioning was wholly inconsistent with typical drowning victims. They explain that individuals who drown are usually found face down, head tucked into their chests, as opposed to Christopher, who was found face up. This added to the fact that all his clothing and accessories were found on the body undamaged, painted an extremely suspicious scenario. Pathologists also point out that there were several insects found burrowed into the skin. These insects could not have survived the frigid temperatures that were present when the body was pulled out of the river. Experts say that the only explanation for these burrowing insects were that Christopher died at a location that was indoors and that his body was later moved. One of the major and most outlandish theories for Christopher's mysterious death was that he was a victim of the so-called Smiley Face Gang, a phantom group of nationwide killers who target college-age young men for assassination. Their motives seem to be entirely racially based, as the victim tally for this particular group are almost entirely comprised of Caucasian men ranging from the ages of 18 to 29. Theories abound that this, as of yet unproven group of serial killers, may have been a precursor to today's modern Antifa and Black Lives Matter movements of far-left extremists. As stated, the Smiley Face Killers targeted only college-aged white men, all of whom were successful and popular academics or athletes. These victims all disappeared after a night of partying, only to be found at later dates in or near a prevalent body of water. But the most eerie aspect, and indeed, the factor that earned this group its name, was the presence of smiley face graffiti that has been found in the immediate vicinity of where most of the bodies have been located.
Take a look at these faces. They're some of the more than 40 college-age men who mysteriously drowned. The tragedy spanning 25 cities and 11 states. Two former NYPD police officers say that they are all murder victims linked to what they call the smiley face killings.
Now, of course, most law enforcement entirely dismiss the notion of the Smiley Face Gang. They chalk it up to just more conspiracy theories that have run unbound on the recesses of the internet. In a final disquieting footnote to the Christopher Jenkins case, when asked if any such graffiti was found near Chris's body, the way the officers reacted to the question made it painfully obvious that the answer was indeed a haunting yes.
What is the truth behind the mysterious death of Chris Jenkins? Was it some tragic accident, as police maintain? That Christopher merely fell off a bridge, being too drunk after a night of Halloween partying? Or was he somehow targeted by a shadowy cabal of racist serial killers who killed young Chris simply for the color of his skin? We'll let you decide where the evidence points you. However, one thing is for certain. When Chris was wandering the darkened streets of Minneapolis the night he died, he clearly ignored the numerous signs along the road that warned him to question everything and trust no one. One of the most potent emotions known to man is the feeling of rejection. Sadness, anger, and fear all rolled into one. However, there is another kind of emotion that often accompanies rejection, and that is the desire for some kind of retribution. Whether imagined or truly justified, it makes very little difference to the individuals involved. One young woman would learn this the hard way, as her given right to say no was tragically turned against her, and it is suspected, many would say even obvious, yet not proven. This is the mysterious death of Debra Wolfe.
The city of Fayetteville, North Carolina, has a rich and vibrant history, steeped in Southern charm and hospitality, but at the same time having a sprawling urban economy with such grand sights like the famous Cape Fear Botanical Gardens or the revered Veterans National Park. The pride of Fayetteville residents is evident anywhere you go within the city. In any case, it was also the home of 28-year-old Debra Ann Wolfe, a spontaneous and well-liked young woman who was on the fast track to success. Her career as a registered nurse afforded her the amenities and comforts of owning her own cabin, which she shared with her two beloved canines, and to top it all off, was in a budding and happy relationship she'd been in over a year at that point. Friends, family, and a meaningful career. Indeed, Debra seemed to have it all. However, there was an underlying dark side to the fairy tale. As an attractive young nurse, it was only natural for the vivacious 28-year-old to receive a fair amount of attention from the opposite sex, yet not all of it was welcome. For several months, Debra had been complaining that she was being harassed by not one, but two fellow employees at the hospital of where she worked. The harassment reached such levels that Debra had to confront both men on two separate occasions, claiming that she was already in a committed relationship and as such wasn't interested in their advances. Fast forward to Christmas Day of 1985, in which Debra and her extended family were gathered for their traditional gift opening and festivities. Before too long, Debra had to leave in order to make her shift at the hospital. It was to be a memory that was seared into her mother's mind, as it was the last time Virginia Edwards would ever see her daughter alive. After Debra finishes her shift at work, she returns home. Nothing more heard from her that particular night. The morning of the 26th starts rather typical at the Veterans Hospital, however. As the hours tick by, people start to notice the young nurse's unusual absence. She was due back in to work an early shift, but is a no-show, something that was very out of character. After several attempts to contact her via phone go without success, Virginia Edwards is notified of her daughter's strange vacancy. Debra's mother immediately heads over to the cabin only to find that things are amiss outside. There are beer cans and other debris littering the front, and her two pets are left running free and unattended. Upon entering the cabin, there are several of Debra's personal items left strewn about the floor, and after thoroughly searching the house, the young nurse is nowhere in sight. Panicked by this point, her mother checks the answering machine to see if any of her messages contain a clue to where Debra could possibly be. Instead, she is greeted with an eerie male voice, one which she doesn't recognize.
Hey Deb, missed you here at work today. Just wondering how you doing. If you're able to give me a call up here at the ward, I'm at 822-7007, or I'll give you a call at home tonight. You've been out a lot of days. You made me worry when you missed another one. Just want to make sure you're okay. Bye.
Alarmed by the message, but also puzzled at its meaning, Virginia notes that the individual seems to claim that Debra had missed several days of work, which she knew to be false, as Debra had been accounted for up until the morning of the 26th. The police are then called in, yet little is done by the responding officers. Debra's mother is informed that a full-scale search cannot take place until 3 days have elapsed. 5 days after that, and a full search effort is finally mounted for the missing woman, but despite having a full contingent of officers, as well as volunteers and bloodhounds present, nothing is found. Inexplicably, the small pond by the side of Debra's cabin is not searched, despite repeated pleas by her family to do so. On New Year's Day of 1986, Virginia decides to take matters into her own hands and hires 2 divers to finally search the small pond. In the murky waters, one diver spots a pair of footprints and heavy drag marks in the mud. This leads him to a large submerged oil drum, and inside he finds the body of Debra Wolfe, Authorities are again contacted, and what would follow would be a long and drawn-out conflict between Debra's family and Cumberland County Police. An autopsy is performed, and the findings seem to contradict the presumed cause of death, namely accidental drowning. No water was found in Debra's lungs, and there was a conspicuous absence of froth in her airway. Not to mention that the body was in a relaxed position with her eyes and mouth closed. The absence of any kind of bloating of the body didn't seem to support that she had been laying at the bottom of the water a week or more before her discovery. All these facts culminated in the coroner changing Debra's official cause of death from accidental to undetermined. This would further put the family at odds with law enforcement, as the latter would continue to insist that Debra's death was a mere accident. All this despite the small pond was only 5 feet at its deepest, and her body found only a few inches from shore. To complicate things even more, the police adamantly denied the existence of the old oil drum in which divers found Debra's body stuffed into. They say the supposed drum was just her winter coat bloated out and filled with water, therefore it being mistaken for an oil drum. It's a claim that most find preposterous, to say the least. Yet it was a well-known fact that Debra did indeed own an old drum that she used to collect firewood, and that the said drum had mysteriously disappeared from off her property, something to which police have yet to acknowledge. Two months after her body is recovered, Virginia is able to inspect the clothes that her daughter was found in. To her surprise, she recognizes none of it and comments that all the clothes were much too big for Debra, almost as if someone had dressed her in men's clothes after her death. In addition, not a speck of mud was found on any of the clothing items, which flies directly in the face of the claim that Debra had simply fallen into the pond. More evidence seemed to present itself that someone other than Debra Wolfe had been near the cabin. When examining her car, it was found that the driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, a state that Debra could not have driven it in due to her small stature. She would not have been able to reach the pedals. The two men that had supposedly harassed Debra were extensively questioned, and it was found that one of them had indeed been the one to leave the strange voice message. However, beyond this piece of telling evidence, neither man could be conclusively linked to Debra's death, and as such, no charges could be filed. Virginia Edwards would sadly never find closure in the mysterious death of her beloved daughter. She passed on in the summer of 2002, never knowing how Debra truly met her end, and almost 40 years later, we are no closer to finding that particular answer. Did Debra Wolfe die in a tragic accident, as the official reports tell us? Or was it the far more likely scenario that she was killed at the hands of another? We'll, of course, let you be the judge.
It is often said that the good die young, and according to Virginia Edwards, no truer words were ever spoken, especially in the case of her daughter Debra. That last cold night, Debra Wolfe failed to check a very crucial message that was left for her. And I think you all know the message that I'm talking about. The one that warned her to question everything and trust no one. Until next time.